ඔබ සැමට උතුම් දළදා සමිඳුන්ගේ ආශිර්වාදය ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා. ශ්‍රී ලාංකීය බෞද්ධයන් වශයෙන් අපට වෙසස් වූ මහාර්ග සංස්කෘතියක් උරුම වෙලා තියෙනවා. එදා විසූ රාජදරුවන්, රටවැසියන්, මහා සංඝරත්නය මේ වෙසස් වූ මහාර්ග සංස්කෘතිය වර්තමානයේ දක්වා රැගෙන එන්නට රැක ගන්නට කටයුතු කළා. ඓතිහාසික කන්දුරුරට ඇසළ පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍යයේ පස්වන කුඹල් පෙරහැර අද දිනේ වීදි සංචාරය කිරීම සඳහා සියලු කටයුතු සූදානම්. වෙනදා නම් මේ සෙන්කඩගල නුවර පුරයට පැමිණ ඔබට සියසින් මේ පෙරහැර මංගල්‍ය අසිරිය අත්විඳින්නට දැක ගන්නට අවස්ථාව උදා වෙලා තිබුණා. නමුත් වර්තමානයේ අද ඒ අවස්ථාව ඔබෙන් ගිලිහී තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසාවෙන් අප සූදානම් වෙනවා මේ පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍ය අසිරිය වෙසස් වූ අසිරිය ඔබට සජීවීව ගෙන එන්නට. ඒ නිසාවෙන් අපි බැතිසිත්ව ආරාධනා කරන ඔබට සෙන්කඩගල නුවර ඇසළ පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍යයේ පස්වන කුඹල් පෙරහැරේ අසිරිය සජීවීව අත්විඳින්නට.
Dalanda Samidu Pihitai. You are now joining with us with a special live broadcast of the 5th Kumbal Perahera, brought to you by the Media Bureau of Sri Dalanda Maligava.
You are now seeing Perahera officials obtaining the permission and blessings of the Diyavadana Nirame before commencing their street perambulations. Making his way to the upper to the lower chamber, we now see the official monk of the Malvatta Vihara, Venerable Tibbatuave Sri Medankara Thero, carrying the relic casket towards the royal tusker.
The relic casket will be placed within the Ranhili gate, mounted on the adorned tusker, who will light up the 5th Kumbal Perahera. Marking the beginning of the Kandy Esala Perahera dedicated to Lord Buddha, we see the Perahera officials offering flowers and garlands to the Perahera casket.
And this is the devout moment when the great tusker steps majestically down from the Mahavahalkada to the Sandagala in preparation to walk the streets of Kandy. After a period of 3 years, we see the most noble Nadungamue Raja Tusker being appointed as the royal tusker in the 5th and final Kumbal Perahera for the year 2021. after 10 long days of walking all the way from Gampaha to Kandy, we see him doing his honors in his usual role after a period of 3 years, as mentioned before.
This bird-eye view shows the serene beauty of the Kandian night sky, and that marks the beginning of the 5th Kumbal Perahera. We now witness the first troop of today's Perahera, and this is the whip masters making their way in the hill capital city of Kandy. The duty of the whipmaster is to clear the way for the holy Perahera casket. In single file, they wield their whips to notify the citizenry of the impending approach of the Bhupati or the king.
Although the whip conjures a fear in most minds, the sight of the Perahera whip masters has the opposite effect, calming the population, since they are the ones who clear the way for the holy Perahera casket to be carried in the streets of Kandy.
When the rain gods pour down life-giving water from the heavenly skies, there we hear the roaring sound of the thundering. This is the very sound symbolized by these lashing whips. They fill the Kandian sky and the hearts of the weavers alike. This is why the whip wielders are tasked with paving the way for the approaching Perahera and the sacred relic casket.
In the time of the kings, the whip was an instrument of punishment. But this is not a duty of that nature. Here, the instrument is used to remove fear and create a sense of love and compassion among the people and bring merit to them.
The whipmaster's duty is handed down from generation to generation of their clans. According to our traditions, Peraheras that do not have this pedigree are not even being called as Peraheras.
These whips have to be carefully manipulated without hurting their colleagues. And this team we see here today is trained by Mr. Upali Jayaratna. We have been seeing 5 consecutive evenings of Kumbal Perahera processions, and we will be stepping out into the Randoli Perahera processions tomorrow. And both of these genres of Peraheras have their individual differences, but the act of these whip wielders will still stay consistent. On previous years, we have seen great numbers of people throwing coins into the paths of the whipmasters as an offering to ward off evil from their children and smoothen their life path.
Indeed. However, this year, due to the corona pandemic situation, we don't see such crowd. Still, we are sure that all these people are watching this Perahera with the same respect from their homes. Following the whip wielders, we now see the fireball dancers making their way to light up the fifth Kumbal Perahera.
Just as lightning flashes across the skies, the Perahera too has its flashes of light, whipping across the faces of the people, lining in the streets to watch the procession. This is the offering of fire to the gods, to water the earth with rain. However, since we do not have spectators in the streets, all the audience joining us from the cyberspace will be welcomed with this act.
The sight of lightning as a precursor to the descent of the rain gods is a phenomenon of nature. Those blinding flashes are a cooling heat in the Kandy Esala procession. This is the heritage of the traditions of our torch dances.
It is a belief that a Perahera procession is an indeed picture of a rainfall, and the act of fireball dancers are intended to depict the flashes of lightning.
The balls of fire these dancers are wielding in rotational forms are painting the night sky with varied patterns of light.
The sun, moon, earth, universe, solar month, night and day are all cyclic, and the fire dancers highlight those universal cycles on how they burn and cool us in our life cycles.
The fire dancers are completely focused and immersed in their art, and they are keeping their minds and bodies one-pointed as they create their cyclic patterns of fire. This is because the slightest inattention could result in disaster.
And these talented acrobats are trained by Mr. E.D. Tilakaratna.
The balls of fire is a spectacular sight indeed in the Kandy Esala Perahera. The fireball wielders are creating cyclic patterns in the dark sky, reminding the lay spectators of the lightning that marks a soon-to-be rain. While it may seem like a sport for the young performers, the elderly see it rather as a sacred duty to please the gods.
Indeed, and these dancers tame fire and give it as a Dalada offering, mindful of its part in cooking, protecting crops and chenas, and dispelling darkness, while creating curiosity, satisfaction, and amazement to people who are viewing this procession.
The true import of these dances is seen when a large group of them perform simultaneously, merging their various fiery elements into an amazing display of light and heat. The tradition is handed down from generation to generation, with individuals of all ages, from the very young to the very old, taking part in the display of the kingly heritage of their clans.
And now in front of us, we see the group of flag bearers, led by an official carrying the national flag of Sri Lanka.
The national flag of Sri Lanka is a symbol of unity and harmony. It represents all the ethnicities that we are, and it proudly represents our cultural identity, which runs for over 2500 years. The Buddhist flag bearers display our Buddhist inheritance that has nurtured our culture into what it is today.
The sight of Buddhist flags create a sense of unreflecting joy on the part of the people viewing the Kandy Esala procession, reminding them that this is celebration, devotion, and offering to the Buddha.
The hexa-colored flag garlands the people with the 6-colored radiation of light attributed to the Buddha, cooling them as nothing else possibly can.
And this group of flag bearers is represented by the Chandananda Buddhist College in Kandy.
The white-clad flag bearers remind the people of the way the Buddha's Dhamma impacts their lives and the way to obtaining release from the cycle of life.
And following the flag bearers, now we can see the sword bearing officials. These sword bearers symbolize the protection given to the Perahera. And Dalada procession is a procession that is aimed at reducing and eradicating sorrow and sadness. Yet, when people see these sword bearers walking in it, there is certainly going to be a question as to why someone is wielding a weapon is being made part of it.
Indeed, Nilesh. One may definitely wonder the function of sword bearers in a Buddhist procession such as this. While Buddhism promotes non-violence, it is with utmost respect and gratefulness that we remind our heroes who sacrificed so much to ensure the protection of the sacred tooth relic.
And now we see the very first official on a tusker, who is the Perahera. And the tusker who is joining in the procession is Kandula, who belongs to Venerable Kollupitiye Mahinda Sangharakkhita Thero, the chief incumbent of the historic Kalaniya Rajamaha Viharaya.
And now we see the Hevisi troupe of Sri Dalada Maligava.
Until the Hevisi drum beaters, who are permanently seconded to the service of the Dalada Maligava, arrive in the procession, no Panchathura Vadana or making of sound using either drums or any other musical instrument is permitted in this procession.
The prohibition of the use of other traditional musical instruments before the first Hevisi, namely the Horanara, Talampota, cymbals, Daula, conch, kombua and anklets, is to ensure that the order of playing these instruments is not compromised.
The Perahera is a yearly occurrence to pay homage to the sacred tooth relic. It is therefore a yearly tradition that the four leaders of the Hevisi troupe arrive first in the Dalada procession. And for this, the four great drum clans of the Dalada Maligava, who are namely Uduwela, Malagammana, Ihalavela and Molagoda, contribute with great devotion and pageantry to the celebration. The four leaders depict the recognition given to them by the king through the ways in which they decorate their Hevisi drums.
Indeed. And when you look back at the history, the ancestors of these performers were also part of this procession. Therefore, generation after generation, these players have trained hard and evolved into these talented players whom we see today.
And following the Hevisi troupe, we see the Gajanayaka Nilame, or the responsible official for the royal troop of elephants. And the Tusker joining the procession with the Gajanayaka Nilame is the Tusker Sindhu, who belongs to the Venerable Mahanayaka Thero of the Malvatta chapter, Venerable Tibbatuave Sri Siddhartha Sumangala Thero. And right after Sindhu, we now see the water pot dance, which is named as the Kothala Padaya, who is represented in this procession by Mr. Nalin Jayasekara of the Sri Dalada Maligava troupe of dance.
The Kothalapada dance, or the water carrier dance, depicts purity. This dance is simple and it is an example of the simplicity of the Buddhist.
This is why the water carrier is traditionally valued in Buddhism, and the viewers must be reminded of the Pirit water carrier, the yellow water carrier and the milk carrier when they see these dancers.
The dancers spray the Pirit water on the earth of nation. Seeing this, our hearts are lifted by the knowledge and vision of our fertile and beautiful land. This dance symbolically washes the streets, cleaning it for the arrival of the sacred tooth relic.
And following this beautiful dance performance, we see an official carrying the first Buddhist flag. And this is to symbolize that this Perahera is simply a Buddhist festival. And this elephant is Banda, who belongs to the Honorable Diyawada Nilame Pradeep Nilangadala. In fact, Banda is one of the most senior elephants who are taking part in the procession today, who is joining with his elegant march. And following Banda, we will now see a castanet or thalam dance performance that is once again presented by Mr. Nimesh Sumatiratna of the Sri Chandananda Buddhist College in Kandy.
The castanets help all Perahera dancers to keep time as each troupe goes through their moves in accordance with various timing patterns, and it is a necessary part of the Dalada procession.
The Titmatra or timing pattern of the Kandian dance tradition is provided by this instrument, which is the thalampata or the castanet. The instrument is made of brass and gives out a tone that is at times ringing. It is in fact one of the instruments that are involved in the Panchature Nadaya.
The castanet players create that mix of tonal qualities and timing counts, reminding the people of the event and timely life of Lord Buddha.
In fact, Isru, you previously mentioned that this thalampata is used to create the time, and in fact, the word thala, when translated to English, means tune. And it must be highlighted that the Chandananda Buddhist College in Kandy is playing a vital role in this year's Kandy Esala Perahera procession, since this is the third item we are seeing from these students from the Chandananda Buddhist College.
It's absolutely fascinating to see that the younger generation is taking part in preserving this ancient and national inheritance. The castanet is also used in all the three main dancing traditions of Sri Lanka, namely the Kandian, Low Country and Sabaragamua.
And following these students, we now see an official carrying a brass canopy to symbolize protection to the upcoming tooth relic casket. And this elephant is Gajaba, who belongs to Mr. Ranjit Vijay Singha of the Moranvatta Devalaya in Yakkala. It has to be noted that Gajaba is in fact one of the most tallest participants who are taking part in this year's Esala Perahera procession.
Up next, we witness the first Nayandi dance performers of the 5th Kumbal Perahera.
The name Nayandi refers to the costume of these dancers, similar to the West dancing costume, except for the headdress. The Nayandi costume is in fact a part of the ancient royal regalia of the Malaya kings.
The Nayandi dance is also known as Adaves or half-west dance. This is essentially a dance of the Kandian dance tradition. Considering the technical and visual aspects, this can be categorized as a segment of Rupanatum.
And these talented performers are trained by Mr. Saman Nilvitha. It has to be noted that the Nayandi dance performance is a dance act which is seen in various parts in a Kumbal Perahera procession, since we do not see West dancing except in escorting the Perahera casket and the Devadana Nilame.
The fundamental difference between the Nayandi dancers and the West dancers is that the West dancers are wearing a tiara or a headgear, which differentiates them from the Nayandi dancers.
And followed by these Nayandi dancers, we see the young elephant Madhu, who belongs to Venerable Murundeniye Dhammaratana Thero, the chief incumbent of the historic Mutiyangana Rajamaha Viharaya of Badulla.
And on the mount of this majestic elephant, we see a cobra head bearer, once again symbolizing the protection provided to the Kandy Esala Perahera.
And next, after Madhu, we see not a dance performance, but indeed an instrumental act, which is geared by the Thammattama or the double drum.
The Thammattama has been used in the religious ceremonies for many centuries in Sri Lanka. The two wooden sticks used to beat the Thammattama are known as Kadippu. The two faces of the Thammattama produce significantly different sounds. The left face is made from the thick skin to produce a bass sound, while the right face of the instrument produces a sharp, high-pitched sound.
And these instrumentalists are trained by Mr. Sujit Anand. The clans from Hewa Vissa, Yakawela, Arawala, Udunuwara and Ridigama. And right after this Thammattam dance performance, we see Kandula Veera, who belongs to Venerable Kanangama Narada Thero, the chief incumbent of the Sankapitti Viharaya in Kadula.
And on the beautiful robe of this majestic elephant, we see a picture of two people. This is Danta and Hemamala, the prince and the princess who brought the sacred tooth relic to Sri Lanka.
And now what we see is a mixed folk dance who are trained by Mr. P.C.B. Vijay Surya.
The mixed folk dance depicts the simple and the agrarian lifestyle that our ancestors used to live. Amidst the sound of the flute, castanets, and drums, we see the folk dancers are making a beautiful dance.
We have been seeing these instruments used in individual performances before in this Perahera procession, and right now what we see is a celebration of all of them, including the chamaraya, the wooden sticks, and the castanets. And following this mixed folk dance, we see an official carrying a brass canopy, once again to symbolize protection to the upcoming tooth relic casket. And these two elephants are Punchi Banda, who belongs to Mr. Kitsirimewan Velagedara of Panaliya, and Raja, who belongs to Mrs. Sita Sena Nayaka of Hettimulla in Kegor. And it must be noted that both of these elephants are continuous participants of the Dalada Perahera since the year 2005 with the election of the current Diyawad Nilame, Honorable Pradeep Nilanga Dela.
Following that, we see a Pantheru dancers troupe. Although the Pantheru can be seen in all the three major dance forms in Sri Lanka, the Pantheru dance is an exclusively Kandian traditional dance. The origin of this dance goes back to the ancient ritual called Suvisi Vivarana. Here the dancers sing praises for Lord Gautama Buddha for obtaining Vivarana from 24 previous Buddhas to attain Buddhahood.
And also, this instrument is crucial to the Kavikara Maduwa, or the chanting groups of the procession, which we will see with the relic casket. And these dancers are trained by Mr. Palita Hapugoda.
According to one belief, the Pantheru instrument is made in the form of the Chakra Udaya, the prime weapon of Shakra, the king of the gods. And according to another legend, it is said that the anklet of goddess Pattini is used to create the first Pantheru.
After many years, we are blessed to see this sight of a trio of tuskers joining the Kandy Esala Perahera. And the younger generation of the Sri Dalada Maligava's tables is what you see. Miyan Raja, Singha Raja and Buruma Raja, all belonging to the Sri Dalada Maligava, joining the procession clad in white. Has to be noted that most elephants are dressed in white for the Kumbal Perahera processions, and we will see them in colour starting from the Randoli Perahera processions tomorrow.
And now we once again see a serene picture of the beautiful night sky of Kandy. Following that, we see the first West dancing troupe of the 5th Kumbal Perahera procession today. The West dancer is adorned with a traditional costume that represents the royal regalia of the Malaya kings. These dancers have proven themselves worthy of the West tattoo or the West headgear through a number of tests. It takes years of practice and a great effort to obtain this title.
In the ancient times, these performers obtained a royal boon after having done their Vestat tour and danced for the king of Panduasnura to dispel unseen inimical forces that threatened his life. Therefore, in the procession, in order to pay their respect for the Perahera casket, the king and the Nilame, they line the path in which they tread in two files of dancers.
It should also be noted that their dance is accompanied by the Gatavera drummers. The dancers observe their traditional rituals and obtain permission to dance in the procession. However, those who dance at the Maharandoli and the Dalada Perahera are those who have brought with them a samaristic habit and skill in the performance of this art form.
And these West dancers are trained by Mr. Ishanta Ihalavela and Mr. Lasantha Vansekara, who have been performing in this Perahera procession for a number of generations.
It should be remarked that the Kandian dancers' skill and the dance form have been brought to the national consciousness by the Dalada Perahera alone. We now see the Karya Karavana Chorale marching on the streets of Kandy in the 5th Kumbal Perahera.
The Karya Karavana Chorale is the second in command to the Diyavadana Nilame, and it is a heritage position given by royal decree.
And he observes whether or not the complex and unique rituals and devotions associated with Dalada Perahera are conducted in accordance and the decrees that have been laid down.
And now we see the most supreme and the most awaited moment in the final Kumbal Perahera procession, the royal tusker carrying the Perahera casket. And after 3 years, we are seeing the great and the most noble Nadungamue Raja carrying the royal casket, and he is accompanied by Vasana of the Ruhunu Mahakataragama Devalaya and our very own Indiraja, the lead of the Sri Dalada Maligawa stables.
The majestic trio of elephants pass, and following them, we see the chamber of versifiers or the Kavikara Madhuva.
we see them singing a certain tune, and the lyrics indeed display gratitude and they display qualities of Lord Buddha.
And they are followed by another spectacular West dancing troupe. Once again, paving their respect to the sacred relic casket that is being carried on the streets of Kandy.
And on this evening, we see these West dancers welcoming the Honorable Basnayaka Nilame of the Sri Maha Pattini Devalaya in Kandy, Hemanta Herath Bandara, who will be replacing the Devada Nilame as per the tradition of the 5th Kumbal Perahera. And these West dancers welcoming the Basnayaka Nilame are trained by Mr. Sanjeeva Verapitiya and Mr. Peter Surasena, who are once again talented artists and participants of the Kandy Esala Perahera for a number of generations.
The Deyavarna Nilame, who is represented by the Basnayaka Nilame of the Pattini Devalaya today, ensures that the rituals and traditions associated with the Dalada Maligava are strictly adhered to. Additionally, he is responsible for protecting those who are part of the great Dalada heritage. Traditional West dancer is an icon of our great history. You can see the delight written on their faces.
And this is the Honorable Basnayaka Nilame of the Sri Maha Pattini Devalaya, Hemanta Bandara.
Following that, we see the leaders of the 10 villages.
And this marks the end of the Dalada Perahera procession, marking the beginning of the first Devala shrine, which is the Sri Maha Natha Devala Perahera.
And now we see the godly ornaments of God Natha being carried to be placed on the elephant, who is supposed to take these godly ornaments on the streets of Kandy.
And now the first item of the Sri Mahanatha Devala Perahera is an elephant clad in yellow, and this elephant is Rohana, who belongs to Mr. Varuna Kannangara of Horana. And on Rohana's mount we saw an official carrying a Buddhist flag, and right now we see a troop of Buddhist flag bearers who are represented by the Civil Defence of Sri Lanka.
Indeed, Nilesh. The Buddhist flag represented in the Natha Devala procession is no coincidence. God Natha is considered as a god who is aspiring to obtain Buddhahood in the future in the name of Maitri Buddha.
And that itself is the very reason why the Natha Devala procession is what follows the Dalada Perahera procession.
It should also be noted that Natha Devalaya is one of the oldest buildings in Kandy. It is believed to have been built in the 14th century.
Quite an interesting fact about the Sri Mahanatha Devalaya is that it is believed that it was the place where the kings were attained of their kingship. And following these Buddhist flag bearers, we see the second elephant of the Sri Mahanatha Devala Perahera, who is Arjuna, belonging to the historic Veurukannala Rajamaha Vihara of Dikwella. And on Arjuna's mount, we see an official carrying the flag of God Natha. Arjuna is the elephant who was born on the first anniversary of the Sri Lanka Cricket World Cup, which is why he was named as a tribute to Sri Lanka cricket captain Arjuna Ranatunga. And now we see the official Hevisi troop of the Sri Mahanatha Devalaya. Just like in the Dalada Perahera procession, not a single dance or musical item is permitted to take part in the procession before the official Hevisi troop of the Sri Mahanatha Devalaya.
It should be noted that Hevisi is an offering of sound to Lord Buddha that has existed in Sri Lanka since the arrival of Sangamitta Theri with the sacred Bodhi tree. The sound of the Hevisi instruments can therefore invoke the faith or Shraddha in the Buddhist's heart.
And following this Hevisi troop, we now see the mother and the son, Kumari and Bandara, both belonging to Mr. Kamal Kitsiri of Kottava, taking part in the Sri Mahanatha Devala Perahera. Can be noted that most of the elephants are dressed in yellow because it is believed that God Natha was of the complexion of yellow.
And following that, we see the Nayandi dancers representing the Natha Devalaya.
The Nayandi dance performance is actually a dance act that is celebrated across the Kumbal Perahera procession, since in the Natha Devala Perahera itself, we are seeing two dance performances representing Nayandi. And this Nayandi dance performance is represented by the Vishuddhi Kala Ayatanaya.
Talking about the legendary origin of the Kohomba Kankara ritual, which was the birthplace of West dancing as well as Nayandi dancing, it should be noted that it was the curse of Kueni, the betrayed queen of King Vijaya, that required an elaborate ritual such as this to save the king from the curse.
And following this Nayandi dance performance, we see two of the most handsome elephants taking part in the Sri Mahanatha Devala Perahera. And on one side, we see Vijitaraja of the historic Dimbulagala Rajamaha Vihare and Kandula belonging to Roshan Patirana.
And on their mounts we saw the sun and the moon symbols representing the pledge that our ancient kings made to hold this annual festival until the sun and the moon exists.
And now what we see is the Savarang dance performance of the Sri Mahanatha Devalaya.
In the times of our kings, the nobility and the royalty used to be fanned as a way of showing respect. And in this Perahera, these fan dancers are showing their respect to the godly ornament by fanning and adding a cool breeze in the streets.
An interesting historical fact behind the Savarang dance performance is that the king and the queen and a selected group of officials were honored by being fanned from this instrument named as a Savarang. And a variation of this instrument too was seen prior, which was the Chamara, which had the fan on one end, but the Savarang instead have the fans on both its ends. And following the Savarang dance act, we now see Taraka, the elephant belonging to the Honorable Basnayaka Nilami of the Sri Mahanatha Devalayams, Gayan Hinkenda.
And following that, we see another Pantheru dance performers making their way in the last kingdom of Sri Lanka. According to one of the stories that we hear from our ancestors, the Pantheru was a boon of war that the Sura or the gods won after defeating a group of Asuras or the demons.
And following this Pantheru dance act, now we see Lasanda, who belongs to Devinuwara Uppulwan Sri Vishnu Devalaya.
Following that, we see a Nayandi dancing performance representing the Natha Devalaya.
A special feature of the Kumbal Perahera processions is that we see these Nayandi dance performers welcome the ceremonial tuskers who are carrying the godly ornaments. And we are about to see a difference in this from the Randuli Perahera processions, which we will see from tomorrow.
Similar to the West dancers who paid their homage to the sacred relic casket, these Nayandi dancers are paying their homage to the godly ornaments of God Natha. Now we see the godly ornaments of God Natha being carried by a majestic elephant who is waiting patiently and watching closely how the Nayandi performers are paying the homage to the godly ornaments of God Natha.
And this is the chief incumbent of the Sri Mahanatha Devalaya who will walk ahead of the ceremonial tusker carrying the godly ornaments of God Natha. And this task is dedicated today in this fifth and final Kumbal Perahera is to the tusker Muthuraja belonging to Venerable Okkavita Vipulasara Thero, the chief incumbent of the Kandy Vihara in Aludgama. And Muthuraja is accompanied today by Kumari, who also belongs to Vipulasara Thero of the Aludgama Kandy Vihara, and Rani, who belongs to Mr. Nalaka Jayasingha of Godagama.
Sprinkled by flowers and showered by garlands of flowers, we see the godly ornaments of God Natha are being carried by this majestic elephant.
In fact, the godly ornaments of God Natha are carried by the tusker who bears the longest tusks in Sri Lanka.
Following that, we now see the commencement of the Vishnu Devala procession. We now see the godly ornaments of God Vishnu being carried to be placed on the mount of the elephant, who will be tasked to take them to the streets of the hill capital city.
God Vishnu was supposed to appear in 10 different appearations or avatars, and he is also aspiring to become a Buddha in time to come.
Now we see the flag bearers representing the Vishnu Devala procession.
A difference between these flag bearers and the rest of the other processions is that we see the provincial flag bearers customarily leading the Vishnu Devala procession. And the reason is, it is believed that Lord Buddha has designated God Vishnu to overlook the sovereignty of Sri Lanka, and this is why the flags representing various provinces are carried in the Vishnu Devala procession.
One would see that those who take part in this Perahera are mostly clad in blue, since this is the color associated with God Vishnu. And we will also see the vehicle of God Vishnu, which is a mythical bird called Gurula.
And now we see the first elephant of the Sri Mahavishnu Devala Perahera. And on his mount we see an official carrying the flag of the Satara Koralaya. This elephant leading the Vishnu Devala procession today is Haritha, who belongs to Mr. Tusitha Ranavaka of Denyaya.
And on the robe of this majestic elephant, we see a picture of the mythical bird Gurula.
And now we are seeing the official Hevisi troupe of the Sri Mahavishnu Devala in Kandy. Unlike in the Dalada Perahera procession and the Sri Mahanatha Devalaya, the tune which is played by this Hevisi troupe is different, and the reason is the various shrines have their own respective tunes that are played by their Hevisi troupes.
Sangamita Theri brought 18 schools of art with her from India, and Hevisi was one of them. Her arrival to Sri Lanka happened in 288 BC, and this gives us an idea how ancient this tradition is.
It definitely has to be mentioned that most of these performers we see in this screen today are resident Hevisi troupe instrumentalists of the Sri Mahavishnu Devala Perahera.
God Vishnu is also found in the Hindu religion. It is said that he is one of the main gods in Hinduism, and he is in charge of sustaining the life on earth.
And we see Muthubanda, who belongs to Venerable Murundeniya Dhammaratana Thero, the chief incumbent of the Sri Muthiyangan Rajamahavihara. And on Muthu's mount we saw an official who carries a canopy to symbolize protection to the godly ornaments of God Vishnu.
Following that, we see yet another Hevisi troupe representing the Vishnu Devala procession.
And this Hevisi troupe in fact plays the music for the Savarang dance act of the Vishnu Devala procession. The instrument of the Savarang was in fact used to cool the king and the royalty, but in this procession we can identify that the Savarang dance performance is in fact to cool the most venerated godly ornaments of God Vishnu.
Indeed. And also we can see that these dancers are clad in blue robes and garments, once again representing the color of God Vishnu. The gentle breeze generated by these fans is the softest, and it denotes also in the minds of the people the rise and fall of thoughts in our minds.
The Vishnu Devala in Kandy in fact plays a vital role as the custodian and the main distributor of cup to the other three Devalayas, and the place where the Valiyak Natuma to reduce evil is to be held at the end of the Kandy Esala Perahera. And following this Savarang dance act, we see one of the most ancient and most senior participants of the Sri Mahavishnu Devala Perahera, who is Banda, belonging to Mr. Sisira Samarakon of Polgahavela.
Following Banda, we now see the Udaki dance performers.
The Udaki is a hand drum and holds a special place in Dalada celebrations. It is in fact used as the tool that provides the steady beat or note to the Kavikara Madua or the chanting troop.
Indeed, the Udaki is a Sri Lankan drum. As ancient as it is, this musical instrument can be instantly tuned by the Udaki player while he is playing it.
And following them, we see Sanju and Tikiri belonging to Mr. Jagat Vitana joining the procession.
And on their mounts, we can see canopy bearers, once again symbolizing the protection given to the godly ornaments of God Vishnu.
And
We now
now,
witness a group of Pantheru dancers.
following these Pantheru dancers, we now see another trio of elephants joining in the Vishnu Devala procession. On one side, we have None belonging to Mr. Sarath Jayalat of Kurunagala. We have Mali belonging to Mr. Chatura Vikramanayaka of Horana, and Muthu who belongs to Mr. Indika Mudunkot of Manikinna. It has to be mentioned that all None, Mali and Muthu have been very occasional participants of the Sri Mahavishnu Devala procession.
And now we see the next Nayandi dance performance team representing the Vishnu Devala procession. This Nayandi dance performance team is welcoming the godly ornaments of God Vishnu, which we can see from behind.
The approaching full moon simply signals us that the final Randoli Perahera, which is scheduled on the Nikini full moon Poe day, is just near.
It is believed that before the foreign invasions of Sri Lanka, these dancing acts did not have much Angampura parts in it, but now we do see certain elements of Angampura,
And this is the most devout moment of the Sri Maha Vishnu Devala procession, where the ceremonial elephant Suranimala, belonging to the Alutnura Sri Dadimunda Devalaya, will be carrying the godly ornaments of God Vishnu. And accompanying Suranimala, we see Vasana belonging to Mrs. Krishanti Alapatha of Ratnapura and Sita belonging to Mrs. Nilanthi Veerasinghe of Mirigama.
Now we see the godly ornaments of God Vishnu. And that marks the end of the Vishnu Devala procession and the commencement of the Sri Maha Kataragama Devala procession. We now see the godly ornaments of God Skanda or God Kataragama being carried by the officials to be placed on the mount of the sacred elephant who will be taking them to the streets of Kandy.
And now we see a troop of flag bearers, in fact a mix of Buddhist flags and also a set of traditional flags that represent the peacock, who is considered as the vehicle of God Kataragama. And these officials are represented by Mr. Dilan Chaturanga Ratnayaka.
According to the legendary stories about God Skanda, the peacock was in fact one of the demons that God Kataragama defeated. After defeating this demon, God Kataragama turned him into a peacock and uses him as his vehicle. The colors worn by most of the participants of the Kataragama Devala procession is red. This is because the color associated with God Kataragama is red. And now we see the heavy troop representing the Kataragama Devala procession.
And this troop of Hevisi of Sri Maha Kataragama Devalaya is trained by Mr. P.V. James Guru Nanse. As mentioned before in the Sri Maha Vishnu Devala procession, in this Kataragama Devala Perahera too, we see a different tune that is played by these Hevisi instrumentalists if you will listen close.
Indeed, God Skanda or Kataragama is said to have the origin from South India. Because of that, we are bound to see some South Indian music variants as well.
Accompanied by Hevisi, we now see an item which we did not see in any other Devala procession, which is a Gajanayaka Nilame, the leader of the royal troop of elephants of the Sri Maha Kataragama Devalaya. And as usual, the first elephant of the Sri Maha Kataragama Devala procession today is Manike, who belongs to Mr. Anura Kempitiya of Kegol.
Following the Gajanayaka Nilame of the Kataragama Devalaya, we now see a troupe of castanet players adding more colors to the Kataragama Devala procession. It should also be noted that God Kataragama is considered as the god of war in Hinduism. He is also considered as the protective god of vehicles. In the Kandian tradition, there are 9 main dancings. Ghana dancing is one of them. The castanet players here are making the titei beat, and every step that these dancers are making is in accordance with these rhythmic sound effects produced by these castanets.
And those performers represented the Sarasavi Kala Ayatane of Kegol. And this elephant we see in front of us is Ratna, who belongs to Venerable Bengamue Dhammadinna Thero, the chief incumbent of the Pelmadula Rajamahaviharaya.
Another spectacular sight in the Kataragama Devala procession is a very lively and energetic troupe of wooden stick dancers. The Kataragama Devala procession is comparatively very energetic.
It is believed that God Kataragama indeed favors a lot of energy release, which could be one of the reasons why the procession of God Kataragama is consisted of a much larger and faster tempo. And these wooden stick dancers are represented by the Uppali Dharmasena Kala Ayatane of Matali. And followed by these dancers, we are now seeing Chula, belonging to Venerable Bengamue Dhammadinna Thero of the Pelmadula Rajamahaviharaya, and Sama, belonging to Venerable Uduwe Dhammaloka Thero, the chief incumbent of the Alan Methiniyarama temple in Kirulapana.
And following that, now comes into our sight is a group of Udaki players.
These Udaki dance performers we see in today's procession are trained by Mr. Dhammika Tennakon of the Dhammika Tennakon Kala Ayatane of Napana.
It is truly an amazing sight to see how these performers sing songs, dance, tune and play the instrument at the same time. It should also be noted that Ura Pola and Bogaha Kotua are quite famous regions for Udaki playing.
And following this Udaki dance performance, we now see Kadira, who belongs to the Vipashyarama temple in Maharagama.
On the Mount of Kadira, we see a bronze sun symbol. The symbols of sun and the moon in the Kataragama Devala procession symbolize the dominance of God Kataragama over the world affairs. And this is followed by another special and unique feature of the Kataragama Devala procession, which is a peacock dance.
It has to be mentioned that usually we see these dance forms in the Randoli Perahera processions, but today in the 5th Kumbal Perahera itself, we are able to see a peacock dance. And this peacock dance is trained by Galevela Vinitha Jayaratna, who represents the Sri Ranamayura Kala Ayatanaya.
We previously talked about the South Indian influence that has been included in the Kataragama Devala procession. The music instruments that we witness now are a fine example in this regard. These music instruments represent the South Indian music.
Amidst these beautiful South Indian tunes, we are able to see Panduka, who belongs to the Ganevatta Katharagama Devalaya and is under the responsibility of Mr. Chandana Katriyarachi, alongside with Sankaraja, belonging to Venerable Kolambageyara Mahinda Thero, the chief incumbent of the Sankapala Rajamahavihara in Ambilipitiya.
Coming into our sight next is another group of Nayandi dance performers representing Sri Maha Katharagama Devala procession.
The role of this Nayandi dance act is to welcome the ceremonial elephant who will be carrying the godly ornaments of God Katharagama.
God Katharagama's weapon is believed to be the Velayuda, and the godly ornament that we see in this procession is also such Velayuda.
And this Nayandi dance troupe is trained by a veteran artist, Mr. Upananda Thalgahagoda of the Ratna Kala Ayatanaya.
As one of the two sons of the chief god Ishvara and the chief goddess Parvati, God Skanda is revered by both Buddhists as well as Hindus. His presence is marked by images of six-faced and 12-handed images of God Skanda.
These type of energetic dance performances release a lot of energy and could be quite difficult with the use of face masks, but this year's Kandy Esala Perahera is being held under much regulated health guidelines, and still these performers do their best.
We now witness the Iyer or the chief trustee of Katharagama Devalaya. This is the individual tasked with the protection of the godly ornaments of God Katharagama with his own life. You can see the garments and the dress code of the Iyer to resemble the South Indian influence.
And followed by the Iyer, we now see the most devout moment of the Sri Maha Katharagama Devala Perahera, the ceremonial tusker who will be carrying the godly ornaments of God Katharagama. And today we see Rama, the tusker belonging to Mr. Tudor Gunasekar of Heyanthudua, doing his honors by carrying the godly ornaments of God Katharagama. And accompanying Rama, we see Aruna belonging to Venerable Higgoda Saddhananda Thero, the chief incumbent of the Handala Rajamahavihara, and Esala belonging to Venerable Katugasthara Sarada Thero, the chief incumbent of the Pirisyala Senanayaka Pirivena.
After the godly ornaments of God Katharagama has passed, we now see the commencement of the Sri Maha Pattini Devala procession. We now see the Alatti Ammas performing the rituals before the commencement of the procession.
Leading the procession of Goddess Pattini, we see the troop of Buddhist flag bearers. And they are represented by the Civil Defense Department of Sri Lanka.
Goddess Pattini is a deity who commands great respect among most of the citizenry of the country. This is the only female representation at the Dalada procession. Therefore, in this segment of the procession alone, we are able to see female dancers performing.
Folklore has stated that goddess Pattini was a great model who preserved her chastity, and due to this great and noble quality, she could obtain the highest veneration of human beings. And now we see the heavy troupe of the Sri Mahapattini Devala in Kandy, who are trained by Mr. M.G. Palitha Nishankar, Mr. M.G. Sirisena and Mr. M.G. Premadasa.
According to the legends, Goddess Pattini, in her previous incarnation, was a simple human woman. This woman, by the name Kannagi, preserved her chastity in the face of adverse circumstances. This is why Goddess Pattini is revered by most of the citizenry, including the Buddhists as well as the Hindus, as a goddess of virtue and fertility.
Using the instruments of the Daula, the Thammattama and the Horanava, this is the official Hevisi troupe of the Pattini Devala, playing their own authentic tune. And following this Hevisi troupe, we now see the first elephant of the Sri Mahapattini Devala, who is Mangala, belonging to the most venerable Mahanayaka Thero of the Sri Lanka Ramani Nikaya, and is under the responsibility of Mr. Mahinda Galapatti of Giriulla.
It should be noted that the color affiliated with Goddess Pattini is also yellow. Because of this, we will be seeing most of the performers clad in yellow or white garments. And now we see a mixed folk dance representing the agrarian society which prevailed in ancient Sri Lanka, depicting the simple life that the Sinhalese people lived in the days of yore.
And this troupe of dancers are trained by Miss Takshila Sirivardhana of the Takshila Kala Ayatana of Yatihalagala.
The belief in Goddess Pattini with faith brought blessings on small children and women. She is supposed to be a goddess of noblest qualities, and those who believed in her were cured of hidden diseases, and also they were cured of skin diseases if they led a religious life. The female dancers in the Pattini Devala procession invoke the concept of bounty and fertility.
Followed by these female dancers, we see another female elephant participant of today's final Kumbal Perahera procession, and this is Sita, who belongs to Mr. Roshan Patirana of Maharagama.
Up next we witness a female West dancing troupe. And we can see that they are carrying panterus on their hands, adding more color to their performance. Pantheru dancing troupe has been trained by Miss Vindhya Kulasiri from Jayashani Udarata Nartana Kalayatanaya in Gorakadeniya.
The symbolic relationship between this Pantheruva and goddess Pattini is quite believed by veterans, since it is believed that the Pantheruva is a symbol that has descended from the anklet that is used by goddess Pattini. And followed by these Pantheru dance performers, we see Tharindu belonging to Venerable Kobawaka Dhamminda Thero, the chief incumbent of the Kirivehera Rajamaha Viharaya in Kataragama.
Tharindu is followed by a group of female fan dancers who are lighting up and adding more colors to the Kandy Esala procession.
As stated before, the chamara or the single-sided fan was used as a cooling instrument by royalty, and the purpose of this dance performance in the Sri Mahapattini Devalaya is simply to show the cooling of the godly ornaments of goddess Pattini. And these performers are trained by Ms. Ajanta Kandegedara of the Sarasavi Kala Ayatane of Molagoda.
Next, we see an official holding a canopy, once again representing the protection provided to the godly ornaments of goddess Pattini.
And here we see the two friends, Rani and Kumari from Balangoda. Rani belongs to Mr. Richard Gonakombura and Kumari belongs to Mr. Asanka Vijayasinghe.
Female West dancing or Shirsha Balana Palandavima is one of the highest attainments of the Kandian dancing traditions that we can see. And these female dancers have attained the West Tattva or the Shirsha Bharana, proving that they are capable of taking these traditions to the next generations to come.
And following those beautiful female dancers, we now see Manike belonging to Mrs. Shriyani Gunawardana of Dangovita. And has to be noted that Manike has been one of the most occurrent participants of the Sri Mahapattini Devala procession. And following Manike, we now see the Nayandi dancers who will be welcoming the ceremonial elephant carrying the godly ornaments of goddess Pattini.
The Nayandi dancers are singing praises of Lord Buddha as well as Goddess Pattini in this procession. Now we see the Narumatra, a performance or an act made by the Nayandi performers.
And these Nayandi dancers are being trained by Mr. Mithun Bandara of the Mithun Bandara Kala Ayatane of Watapuluwa. And in front of us, we see the chief incumbent of the Sri Mahapattini Devalaya and the ceremonial elephant carrying the godly ornaments of goddess Pattini follows.
We see the silver image of goddess Pattini mounted on the royal tusker, who is carrying the godly ornament of goddess Pattini.
And this ceremonial elephant today is Bibila, who belongs to Venerable Mahanayaka Thero of the Sri Lanka Amarapura Nikaya and is under the responsibility of Mr. Mahinda Galapatti. And Bibila was accompanied by Bandara belonging to Mr. Kitsiri Kahatapitiya and Manike belonging to Mr. H.R. Nishankar.
What you just saw was the conclusion of the 5th Kumbal Perahera. We are grateful for the support and commitment of both state and non-state supporters who worked tirelessly to make this event successful.
Let there be timely rains that will bring life-giving water to our fields and ensure a bountiful harvest.
May our country prosper.
Dalanda Samindu Pihitai.